Hello.
Yeah, that's your
Yeah.
name.
Squirrel's got me.
Big Jim.
Yeah.
Really cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
That's good that you think of it because that's what deer hunting typically is cold and fun.
Yesterday morning, I'm glassing up on the pass and I see these deer moving. And I'm like, ooh, there's some deer moving. All of a sudden, I just see this person just head down, just hauling ass, wearing shorts and a t-shirt with a pack on. And I'm like, is that Tard? My dad always talks about floating through the woods like the autumn breeze.
So Robert's
When you're
the
275
ghost,
pounds, I don't know how you do that, but
The Freightliner. It's just like a creeper. You're just kind of up in the corner watching what's going on down there.
yeah.
You know,
He's like,
he's up there slapping it, pissing all over everything.
is it warm yet?
How did you know the name of the actor?
That's right. I know.
How did you say his name?
Hervé Villagers. Remember this?
You know what Pertnear means.
If you know what Pertnear means and you live in America, you're a redneck too.
Welcome to the Log Talk Podcast, brought to you by Pertnear Outdoors. What's up, gang? Welcome back, and I think we're on episode 52-ish or something. The weeks are flying by. We're at the end of June, and this week we're catching up with John Teeter of Whitetail Landscapes with a little bit of a follow-up discussion with him to kind of just build on what we talked about the first time, and as we start moving through the summer towards the fall, what you should be thinking about, what you should be working on with your food plots and kind of your land management practices or whatever you're trying to achieve with your land. So for us, I thought it'd be interesting to continue the conversation kind of revolving around the situation that we're in. And if you've been following along with the podcast, Dallas, again, is on with me today. Him and I have really enjoyed doing these podcasts together, and we're spending a ton of time right now as we're working on things over at the farm, both with, trail cam stuff. Obviously we hunt there all fall, but we're just spending a ton of time over there together, which has been a blast. And so Dallas has been very involved in the food plot side of things, and he and Brian for sure know a lot more about it than I do, being that they grew up on the farm. So I'm kind of soaking all this up, but a lot of great discussion here today between John and Dallas, and I took a lot away. I'm learning more and more every time I partake in one of these conversations, and I'm really enjoying it. So John's a wealth of knowledge, very easy to listen to, and also very reachable. So if you listen to this and things are starting to resonate with you, I would definitely recommend to reach out to John. Extremely friendly guy. He'll talk to you on the phone. He'll even work with you. He obviously has his consulting business, so if you'd like him to come out and take a look at your land and see what you're working with, I'm sure he'd be happy to do that. So check John out on social media. Instagram and Facebook is where he does most of his stuff. He has a website, but just about all of his content is being put out on Instagram. So give him a check over there. As far as, like I mentioned, Dallas, this past week, Dallas did a bang-up job getting all the food plots in. The big food plots, that is. I think he worked with his cousin Bill and got a bunch of beans planted for us. So pretty fired up about that. We need some rain pretty bad now. I think just about all of us in New York are in a pretty bad spot as far as rain. I mean, we went from snowing in mid-May to the end of June. We're in a drought. So pretty crazy spring so far, but hopefully we get a little bit of rain here in the next few days, and that'll really help things get going quite a bit. I'm sure the corn and soybeans everywhere will start flying after that. So kudos to Dallas on what he did this past week. Appreciate you getting all that done, buddy. And so I think hit on the hats and stickers real quick. That stuff's going really quickly. So everybody who's already purchased, thank you so much for the support. It's been awesome. I think I've got 11 left of the green hats and 7 left of the gray hats. So they are going quick. I started out with 24 of each. So that's pretty awesome. And the best way to do that is just, if you want to purchase one, is just go on the website and go ahead and order them on there. And if you're local here, you can select to pick them up, or if you would like to have it shipped, just select the shipping method you'd like. we're doing free shipping on orders over $35, and it's not too hard to get to that. If you get a hat and a couple stickers, you will get yourself to that $35 mark. So that's that on that end. Get them before they're gone. I'll be ordering another batch here soon, but the first edition of the hats is running out. So get yours before they're gone. And lastly, I will give a little pro tip, as it is that time of year that a lot of people are getting out and doing some training hikes and training runs and things like that. And I certainly had a rude awakening and broke my own rule last Monday morning. And my buddy Alex and I were out for a hike, and it was about 5:30 in the morning. Well, we left at about 5:15, and about 5:30 in the morning, he was telling me a story about an emergency number 2 he had at one time when he was out running. And of course, you know how that works. You start thinking about it, and next thing you know, you're in that situation. So we got all the way down to the bottom of the hill, and we're about 1.5 miles from the house, and I'm in a real bad spot. And what I broke my cardinal rule is I didn't have any toilet paper with me, so I had my backpack with no toilet paper. So things got a little western over here in Wyoming County, and so I, needless to say, came back with a sleeveless T-shirt. So I've got a pretty sweet new muscle shirt. But this is a fun reminder to everyone out there that if you're going trail running, you're going hiking, especially if it's in those prime time hours when your system is normally doing its thing. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, make sure you've got some TP, because it can make your hike not so much fun if something like that happens and you're unprepared. So I'm glad I was wearing a cotton shirt and had those sleeves on the ready. And I learned that trick from my buddy Chris Lawrence. There's a lot of sleeveless white tees in his top drawer of his dresser. So it's good stuff there. A little light humor for you on the day, and learn from me. Don't go anywhere without your teepee. So without any more, enjoy the podcast and keep fading them. Have a good week, everybody. So I guess just introduce you two to each other quick. You can see each other, so that's easy enough. So John, that's Dallas. Dallas, that's John.
Hey, man. How you doing?
Hey, John.
You guys kind of look similar. If you could grow a little more facial hair, Dallas.
No, that's all I got, man.
That's all you got. All right, so we'll just go ahead and get rolling with it. So we this week we're going to do a kind of a continuation of our little bit of a series we got going here with John Teeter from Whitetail 101. And John was on episode 31 back about 2 months ago. And really, if you haven't listened to that one yet and you'd like to know a little bit more about John and his background, I definitely encourage you to go back and listen to that. It doesn't really make a difference whether you listen to this first or listen to that one first. But we dive into kind of John's background in hunting and some of the things he's doing with Whitetail. Did I say Whitetail 101 or did I say Whitetail Landscapes?
You can say 101, but
yeah,
hey,
well,
this is a 101, right?
Yeah, it's 101. I got other things on my mind. Sorry. I'm listening to Billy scream and I'm just listening to that. You can't hear that?
Oh.
Okay. Well, this will make the cut. So John has a company called Whitetail Landscapes, and he was on with us, as I mentioned. So we wanted to kind of break it down into little segments instead of trying to bite the whole elephant off at once and eat the whole thing. So we're going to kind of go through the season. So as we're in spring right now, getting close to summer, a lot of people are starting to think about getting their own food plots going and maybe some of the things that they should be doing around their property, getting ready for this upcoming hunting season. We wanted to kind of continue that conversation with you, John. So John's with us, and then Dallas Kirsch is on. Dallas has become a regular, and I would almost say you're just my co-host now. This whole coronavirus has really brought us together, man. It's great.
Yep. Call it whatever you want.
Yeah,
it's your show, man. You call it whatever you want.
Yeah. All right, cousin Dallas.
All right.
So that's kind of what we're gonna run down here tonight. We kind of got some rough topics we want to cover, but I've kind of had some sidebar conversations with each one of you guys, and I know Dallas has got, from growing up on the farm, and we're kind of going through a transition right now, as him and I have talked about, where we don't have the same equipment that we have to our disposal for planting and things like that. So a lot of things have changed with us, and I feel like that's fairly relatable to the regular guy, because most landowners don't have big equipment that we used to have. So we're kind of just taking a step backwards rather than a step forwards. And so I guess more or less this conversation will end up being probably a lot of you and Dallas talking, as he understands a lot more of what's coming out of your mouth than I do. So hence having him on here for us, this conversation tonight. So.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this is great. I'm happy to be on. It's been a busy year so far for me. I've had a lot more clients than I thought that they would have, and I'm still doing a lot of writing. I've got crossbow testing this month, and it's just another thing on top of all the other things I'm doing. I just did. I had kind of a boys' day the other day. I had my buddy up. He used to work for Quality Gear Management, and the guy who does the implementation work with me. He's a great guy. He's a logger, professional logger, and we got a chance to walk my property, and so that was kind of good preparation for talking about things that we're kind of doing this summer and recommending to people. When I do a habitat plan, that's one component of it. There's a schedule, and then there's kind of an order of precedence of activities that I want people doing. So you kind of got to think about the season in stages. We're in the summer stage. A lot of guys are thinking about food plots, or they've already put their food plots in. It's kind of a rush to get your seed in the dirt kind of thing. I think of it a little bit differently than that. But right now for me, food plots is not really a big focus because I don't really have the time to commit to food plots. And not that I didn't plant any food plots. I did. I planted just one food plot this year. I simplify things a lot, and I'm really more focused on what's going on in my woodlot, collecting data, planning ahead, setting stands. I was dealing with invasives all spring, so pretty much I was dealing with anything that bloomed early. Essentially, Asian bush honeysuckle. I had some Japanese barberry on my property, just trying to get rid of some of that crap, stuff that I don't want there. And the one thing I would caution everybody is, there's this big push, kill invasives. I'd recommend everyone does it in stages. And if you're going to take something out of your property, replace it. All good things take time. Shrubs take time to build. So you're going to take a shrub out, either plant a new shrub, or God hope that you got another shrub coming in its place. And maybe you can wait 10 years to put a shrub in place, or wait for a conifer. But before you take a tree out that may not be creating a lot of interference in the rest of your property, think about that, what that does to the landscape. I'm not promoting invasives, but think about that as a general practice. So that's one thing that's been coming up recently. Everyone's like, kill invasives. I'm not saying don't kill invasives. Just think about that a little bit, because you lose structure, you lose cover, and cover's king.
Yeah.
And that's an important topic to think about a little bit. Be practical about it,
Yeah, I've struggled with that a little bit over the last few years. We have a lot of honeysuckle and buckbrush, and we have our old old cow pastures is what a lot of that stuff's growing up in, and then a lot of canary grass. And the brush, I know some of that stuff's invasive and it's not really providing a whole lot other than cover, but if you do start it, on one hand, I don't want those things taking over the entire property, so that there's basically just a honeysuckle farm growing. But at the same time, if you start to just take all that stuff out and just make it your mission to get rid of all that, well, you're going to rip out all that cover, and then what's going to replace it? The same stuff's probably going to grow up behind it, right?
Yeah, that happens a lot. I mean, so you're fighting fire with fire in some capacity, but and the other side of it, one of the things I stumbled onto this year was, I'm sitting there talking to my buddy. He's a forester. This is what he does for a living. And we're going through all the tips and tricks and everything. I'm showing him how I construct these bedding areas and the intricacies of these and how things connect. And he's like, holy shit, this is pretty involved. I said, yeah, it's involved. I mean, I have this large, goal I got to achieve. And so we're talking about buckthorn, for example. And I said, I have the hardest time identifying female versus male buckthorn. It's really hard for me to do. I just struggle doing it. Even looking at it,
where's the nuts on them? Where do you?
Well, that's the thing. Those are females, right? So they'll fruit, right? There's the nuts. So what you do, here's a strategy.
Do you lick them, or what do you do?
You don't
We're
like 'em.
confused already. I don't know.
Yeah,
Don't-
you lost me at
don't lick
nuts.
the nuts.
Yeah.
But when
Sorry.
you see the nuts drop, or before you see the seeds drop, mark them, and at that point, select that tree to cut.
So that's the female tree.
That's the female
Okay.
tree. Yep. The male tree, I mean, we're fighting invasives. You can remove it or not remove it. It's just it's up to you. But here's another thing. So not removing invasives can be really destructive. So I swallow wart on my property. Sounds really, really bad. And it is bad. And it will invade your food plots like nobody's business. So, I'm hand pulling it. I'm like prepping. I'm talking to my buddy. I'm like, I got to get rid of this. What do I do? Right. So I'm studying, NRCS. I'm looking at, we're talking about it. And I mean, I knew what to do, but I'm just like, man, when you start getting a lot of this, it becomes overwhelming. So take it in phases, take it in chunks. Even before you timber cut, think about these things because they're going to plague you. You know what I mean? If you don't have a clean slate to work with, it's going to plague you big time. So, not to get into that topic, but, when you see those flowering plants early season, you can identify Asian bush honeysuckle really easily. And we're already past petal drop. Now we're seeing blackberries are coming up. You're starting to see those flower. And deer will eat those, not so much right now, but they generally will. And you start identifying plants in your property and figure out what is what. If you can start doing that, you can buy apps, take pictures. Real simple. Start real simple and start figuring out what's good, what's bad, and then do it based on your preferences. You don't have to listen to any deer guy to figure that out. Figure out what makes sense for you. And then, it's just a kind of a practical approach to things.
Yeah,
The other thing is,
sorry, I was just gonna say,
the
Dallas.
other thing is,
I'm thinking. Oh,
sorry.
no, you go. No, it's your turn.
I will say this. The other thing is if you don't figure them out quick, though, sometimes it's too late. And so you're going to have to move quickly sometimes. So don't just wait. Just think about those things. Do your research. That's one point I want to make.
Yeah, because I feel like what I was just going to say, and it's in relation to that, is I know your dad, Dallas, I think he had a forester. It was a DEC, New York State DEC forester or something. He had him come out and walk the property. And that was one of the takeaways was trying to get rid of some of that buckthorn and, that side hill where it's really prevalent right now, that's goldenrod, and that buckthorn has grown a ton in the last few years. So it's created some good cover, and we're actually seeing more deer activity in that stuff right now. But we've also John, we've been planting, 80 pine trees a year. I mean, we were doing a lot of pine trees there for 4 or 5 years in a row, or more than that, right, Dallas?
Yeah, we were spruce trees. We were doing like a couple hundred a year there for maybe like 5 years, and we're done with that now. I feel like we've got enough of that. But we were just those old pastures. We were just trying to get some more trees in there, some more cover, and now we're trying to actually get hardwoods in there. My brother's been planting a lot of oak trees over the last several years. So, because that's one thing about our property is there's no oaks on it whatsoever. There's a lot of hickory and beech. It's a very diverse hardwoods, but no oaks. So we're trying to add some of that in to the mix.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can't fault anybody for wanting to plant trees. I mean, they're native trees. There's nothing wrong with that. Chickaping oats is a good oak to plant in this area. There's a producer. There's a dwarf one. It's kind of shrubby. Those are producers. So just if you're adding oaks, think about that. Chestnuts are popular. They've been popular for 10 years. Think about that as an alternative.
We've talked about chestnuts a little bit, and we haven't tried it yet. But we've planted a variety of oaks. I think sometimes we don't even know what we're planting because we just pick up acorns and make seedlings out of them and plant them because we're figuring, hey, all different kinds of oak trees, a variety of them, that's all good,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And if you're cutting your timber, before you cut it, plug a bunch of oaks in there. You're doing it in the wintertime. A lot of times those treetops will cover them and give them some protection. It's a free fence.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's a good tactic.
Yeah. So getting into, go ahead, John.
No. Well, I mean, the oak thing aside, I mean, you can slice and dice plantings any way you want. I mean, the point is, if you guys are putting the time into planting stuff, I commend you. People don't, I took 78,000, 75,000 board foot out of my property. I don't know how many years ago. We planted 675 trees this year, my
Wow.
son and I,
That's awesome.
and so it's like, you got to be a conservationist. You got to think about those things. You got to plant the right trees, and they should be in the right location based on the right conditions. You got to look at your soil, the environment, location, where you plant, spruce trees or pine trees or whatever you end up planting. Plant them in the right location, the right orientation, either for hunting, for deer. There's strategies with those. Planting things willy-nilly it's fine too. I mean, you're helping nature, right? I mean, that's kind of the goal behind a lot of this stuff. So go ahead.
No, in planting trees we get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I mean, it's like one of the things that I've grown to look forward to come late April, early May. The weather's finally breaking. We're getting out there. The brush isn't up to your nipples. You can get out there, and this year it was different. We had downtime, and we had all of our kids with us. So, I was out there with Brian, and we're, on the ATVs, and Brian's like, he's like a Rain Man when it comes to these trees. I mean, he's got like literally gallon Ziploc bags full of acorns, and it's just, you go in his garage, it's just like an acorn or an oak tree farm. I mean, he's got solo cups everywhere. Fun fact, every one of those solo cups has had alcohol in it. So it seems to really help the growing process, because the trees are doing all right. So
yeah, we've definitely noticed that acorns like vodka.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So
funny. Yeah, let's jump into some of the topics we have for today, and then so Dallas, I guess if I kind of let you start off and kind of get the conversation going with John, kind of fill him in a little bit with what we've got going on and what we're looking to do here this next few weeks to start to get our food plots going.
Yeah, I thought it'd be a good time of the year to talk about food plots. I mean, it's actually, in some ways, it's a little bit late, but it's just been such a wet, nasty spring that I think a lot of people are probably just scrambling to get some food in the ground right now. And like Billy mentioned before, we have a different kind of situation because we took some old, like we had one old ag field, and then other than that, we just took some of our old cow pastures and converted them into like some small food plots. And the thing is, my dad and my uncle were running a farm there still. So he could just, when Dad was planting his corn and his soybeans all over the property, he just went back into these small areas and lay down in a half acre or an acre of corn or soybeans and just make it basically part of his crop rotation. And we didn't really even have to worry too much about it. We might have to pick a few rocks or do some spraying, but even the spraying he was handling. So we're looking at now, we do have a couple of bigger chunks that we're going to get soybeans planted. My cousin down the road is going to do it, but we have like 3 or 4 of these small food plots that they're not really conducive to big equipment, and we're looking to do kind of a, whatever you call it, like a no-till or like a poor man's plot, some people call it. And we've messed around with some of that stuff before a little bit and got some things to grow, but we're kind of looking at it like that's going to be sort of our new strategy going forward. So we were just wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about what sort of things you'd be thinking about planning and how you would go about doing it with having minimal equipment. We're basically falling back now to being like everybody else, that we have an ATV, we have a disc, we have a backpack sprayer, we have some equipment, but limited. So we just thought maybe you'd want to give some thoughts towards that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, let's assume you have less than that. So let's go further extreme, right? Because a lot of guys don't even have.
Yeah, let's say that we have nothing.
So typically what I do is, there's a couple ways you can go about this. Weed whippers are nice to have, and walk behind brush cutters, and you can rent those. The other thing is a must is a backpack sprayer. So for a season, if you're just thinking about it in that manner, is you buy a backpack sprayer, diaphragm sprayer, please. Just people like to mix sulfates and other materials, so make sure you buy a diaphragm, not a piston. I've gone through too many sprayers. So there's a chunk of advice. And a weed whipper works just well. You could have only $100 of an investment in equipment, or if you can't borrow a weed whipper, I guess it'd be a few $100. What I typically do is I'd focus on a couple things. I'd focus on fall plots at that point. That's the only equipment you had. I wouldn't worry about spring stuff. In those areas, I would go in and I would tame whatever's in there. Hopefully, it's a shrubby field area, mostly field. Likely, it could be goldenrod or some higher type forbs. Knock those down, and I'd knock those down in July. And then once you get in there in July, things will start to kind of regrow. It'll take a couple weeks to go, and I hit it about mid July. 3 weeks into July, I'd hit it with generic glyphosate Roundup, 2 quarts an acre, something like that. Kill everything. In about a week or two from there, you'll get a lot of annual forbs, and that will be instantaneous attraction. I mean, beyond anything else that you have. That goldenrod will, new shoots will pop out. You'll have all different varieties. That works really well. That's a really simple way to do it. And that literally costs you essentially nothing. The conditions there are, you hope you have the right plants in there to attract deer, but I can tell you, young forbs growing in that warm season time period is, fantastic for deer attraction. Flip side, let's say you want to plant something. Same exact scenario. Okay, you go in there, you mow the area, you kill it, you let it grow a few weeks, you kill it, and you broadcast oats. Simple. Oats, winter rye, red clover. That's it. That will hold you over till the following year. And you'll get a ton of attraction. Now, you might want to delay that planting to, say, August. You can delay things a little bit, plant it in August. And after you kill and spray that plot, the coverage you get from killing those annual forbs or whatever in there will give you enough seed to soil contact. You're going to put probably around 100 pounds an acre, a lot more than you normally do because you just broadcast it. So in that case, that's minimum. A bag of oats is $15. A bag of rye is $15. Red clover might be a little more expensive, $6 a pound. But again, you're not putting, these are probably small areas, probably less than an acre. That literally takes nothing. People are focused on these, deer in a bag stuff. You don't need any of that stuff. There's a really simple way to do it. Now let's follow back up. So we're going in the springtime. What's going to happen? Winter rye is going to come up, right? Oats are going to be dead. Oats winter kill. Clover might come up, might not come up. Now you got a biomass. You got this high winter rye to work with. You can roller crimp it, or I've done this in my garden. You can crimp it. You can take a 2x4, put a string on it, and crimp it over. And before you do that, sow in buckwheat or oats and peas or some combination of that. And now you got a summer crop. And literally, you didn't touch the soil. And that works phenomenally. It's a simple way to do it, and there's no equipment that goes along with that. And that is beyond poor man. I mean, I was doing these food plots, and we were talking, they probably only cost me, I'm doing really small ones, maybe $8 to $10 a food plot, small, 1/10 of an acre kind of thing, 1/4 acre, small, $10. Anybody can do that. It's a time thing.
Can you explain crimping? Because rookie, I guess I get what you're saying with the 2x4, but explain what that is. I hear it talked about, but.
All right. So in the example, the winter rye it survives the winter, and it grows, exponentially till, it reaches a pollen stage. So you'll be able to shake it. You can shake it and see that grass, that pollen come out. Before it hits that point, around the time it hits that point, that's probably like June, end of May, June, as an example. You want to take something that kills the vascular system. So a plant obviously, grows, and it feeds itself through its vascular system just like trees do. You're crimping that, or where you're breaking that stem in multiple sections, so that structure, that stemmy structure, is now laying flat, and it creates a mat. Now, one thing I will say, And so get these guys that do this, Jeff Sturges, people have probably heard of him, guys that do habitat stuff. They put on such an immense layer of these cover crops that it's really not conducive to some of that practice I'm talking about. They'll put on 200 pounds an acre. And when you go to deal with that stuff in the spring, it's a mess. It's way too much biomass. As an alternative to winter rye, there's a thing called wheat or triticale. So wheat, you can buy awnless wheat, and that's a preferred food source. They eat the hell out of those heads because they're awnless. There's no hairs. That's an alternative. It has less biomass, so there's less stems, less volume in the springtime. So that would be an alternative to, winter rye as an example. One other point to mention is the deer eat the hell out of those because they're high carb. High carb is what you want. Our stress period is in wintertime, into April, and we want to feed those deer in that time frame. There's not a better option that's affordable. We can't afford corn or grain beans like you're talking about, grain soybeans. You're talking a few hundred acres or a few $100s an acre to plant, if not more than that, with fertilizer and everything like that. So if you get away from that, you're doing the poor man's plot, and I do them on my own property and where I hunt. It's a really simple alternative. You can buy crimpers. They're expensive. I made one, but they're, you can pull them on the back of the ATV. You're probably talking $1,500 for a crimper. So, they're expensive.
Yeah, I've seen Grant Woods do the 2x4 crimper thing. Now, you're saying to do that in the spring to terminate the winter rye that grows back in the spring or grows up, because we have some of that right now that I planted last year that's actually going to have to be. So, but is that just an alternative to just mowing it? If I have a brush hog, can I just mow it, or is it really?
Well, yeah, here's a thought on that. So one other thing you could do to kind of enhance that spring food plot is you can seed in at 7 to 10 pounds an acre white clover, and you could have put the white clover in the fall time as well. Now, one recommendation: if you're going to brush hog a food plot, you're going to get a lot of these windrows, and you're going to suppress anything that's growing underneath that. So unless you have a real robust root system of clover that's flush, you're going to be dealing with duff on top of that. It's a bad thing. So you want to cut it way before the pollen stage if you're going to brush hog it. Crimping, it's debatable. It's an alternative. You could mow or you can crimp. If you have a mower, mow it. You're at the edge of, you're dealing with a lot of biomass, a lot of material on the ground, and you're going to have those windrows. But again, you could seed buckwheat into it, or oats and peas, and you get 45 to 60 days out of those until you're ready to plant your food plot in end of July, depending on what you decide to plant. So it's really it's fine to brush hog. That's a fine option. I would say you might be a little bit late when you're starting to pick this time frame, but it'll work.
Yeah. We actually have a really nice brush hog that doesn't leave windrows. It actually cuts and leaves a really nice layer. So it's actually like a thatching layer that you could put seed down ahead of time, like a buckwheat. And I think it would actually grow well there. So, but then when you seed the rest of your fall plot in, you have to kill the buckwheat then, right?
Well, the buckwheat will senesce. So I've done it two different ways, depending on the density of your stand. I have to go back and look at my notes on what poundage to plant per acre. But let's say it's a bushel, I'm just making it up. You may not have to terminate it. I can tell you what I did on my land, for example, last year, right? So I was creating food plots in the woods. I cleared out these couple acre areas with a dozer and pretty much raw land. I roller crimped the buckwheat that I had in there. But I didn't have to do that. It wasn't a dense stand enough where I was worried about it. Right. And if the buckwheat, it senesces after 60, 70 days, you're going to get a little bit residual buckwheat. I mean, frankly, I got a medium deer density, maybe 25, 30 deer per square mile in my area. The deer eat the hell out of buckwheat. People say they don't, they do. I've got bite counts. I can show you some statistics on it. I mean, it's a preferential food, and maybe it's not, highly palatable, but the
Yeah.
deer eat it. So buckwheat's a
I
great
think
option.
that
It
I think
grows
that's
easy.
one of the most confusing things is listening to different people say what deer eat and what they don't. And we just had this conversation last week with Steve Shirk about what the deer are eating in the big woods of Pennsylvania. Um, it's it's a selection thing. So they have things that they prefer, but if they don't have that soybean and all they have is that buckwheat, that's what they'll eat. So it probably a lot of what it is depends on what else they have around to choose, and also they like a variety. They don't just stand there and eat soybeans all day every day. They need a lot of different things to browse on.
So let me give you an example of that. So I don't know if you guys have listened to Land and Legacy before. So I'm friends with
Yeah.
one of the Matt Dye. I'm friends with him. So we're talking the other day, and I was talking to him about a topic that just back and forth. And I have staghorn sumac in my property. Most people do in my general area.
Yeah, we have
And
a lot
we
of it.
were talking about deer eating it. And a lot of people think, well, it's rabbits. And rabbits definitely eat staghorn sumac. Deer rub their antlers on it, but deer eat it. The thing I
Oh,
saw
yeah.
today that impressed me, and I was like, milkweed. I have deer eating milkweed, and I had never thought deer would eat milkweed, just because of its cellulose structure. It's got a lot of structure to the leaf. Like when you feel a leaf, nipple wart is one thing that was in my woods, and deer eat the hell out of that. Or jewelweed, you've heard of that, or pokeweed. You can feel the structure of that leaf, and it feels real soft, real palatable.
Yeah.
You can squeeze it in your hand. It's real juicy. Now,
Yeah, it feels like something they would eat.
right, and so you can kind of gauge. Don't even know what it is. It's like, deer might eat that. And it's impressive to see them eat these other things. Staghorn sumac, people probably don't even know that. Multiflora rose, deer eat the hell out of that, and that's invasive. Um,
Yeah.
So start weighing all these things. Oh, bush honeysuckle. Guess what? They eat that too. So you got to kind of go through. They may eat invasives and natives, and it's kind of a learning experience. But with food plots, you're planting something maybe not necessarily for yield, but you're planting something for preference. So if you're going to plant something that deer are going to be interested in, you hope there's some there's some high production of whatever you're planting. So you kind of got to be smart about how you do it. The other thing guys aren't doing is they're not taking soil samples. I mean, the basic soil samples like $13 or $15 to get some of the micronutrients in there. I mean, a bag of fertilizer is $15, and you might save yourself that $15 in transition, but it's a time thing. A lot of guys don't know how to read a soil sample. I got clients that have no idea how to read a soil sample, and that's okay. I give them instructions and we talk it through. But don't be scared about the soil sample, but focus on a couple key things. You can tell a lot. You can get soil maps on your property before you even dig and look at what your soil is. Some soils are going to have, they're going to be maybe sandy, some are going to be silty, some are going to be clay-like. I mean, you're going to have variation in the soils, and that can start to gauge on, if you know soils and you don't get a soil test, you're kind of weighing this, this oddity where you don't really understand really what the soil is like. You can look at it on a map, a soils map, but until you get the soil test, you don't really know what the chemistry of that soil is. So I would recommend everyone getting a soil test. And if you don't know how to read one, call me. I'll help you. They're not hard to understand. Most important is look at your pH. Start there. We want, most of the soils around here are acidic, anywhere between 4. I've seen soils down like 4.8. Here at my house is 5.3. A couple clients' land, I've seen perfect soil. They've got limestone embedded in there. They're lucky. And so they've got, and that's a component of their location, the type of soil they have. But anyhow, you might want to start with amending that. That's the first thing you do, because you're throwing money in the air if you start putting fertilizer into something with a pH of 4.3, 4.4, 4.5 in the 5s. It's logarithmic, so it multiplies. 6 to 7 is 100 times different in fertility or fertility options. And acidity. So you need to think about that. So I'd start with a soil test for anybody who's getting into food plots. And there's a lot to talk about there, but that's the starting point.
What are we working with, Dallas, over there? I was thinking it might be kind of clay soil, but what are we working with?
I don't know what our pH is. I know that like on the food plots that Dad was doing, the bigger ones, he's probably got it under control. But like some of those side ones that we put in that are smaller, we definitely need to get those tested out because I don't really know what they are. I mean, we put some lime down on them a couple of years ago, so we probably brought the pH up a little bit, but we probably should, that's one of the first things we need to do this year. And on that, one of the most common questions I hear, a lot of people know that they need to get their soil tested, but they're not sure how. I hear that all the time. Where do I go to get a soil test, or how do I do that?
Yeah, so I go to my local ag store. You can do them online. The seed companies, they sell them. Bass Pro Shop has them. I would recommend, if you're going to get a soil test, do not get just macro, get micronutrients. And then if you don't understand what the micronutrients, like for example, if you plant corn, corn requires a high zinc content. So you're going to have to think about, okay, what synthetics or what do I need to do to improve that soil? Now, I don't want to get into this other topic yet, but I don't use synthetics on my property. And there's a new trend, and it's a regenerative ag trend, and I don't want to use that term because it's kind of a farming term. It takes some of there's other thought process that goes into your planting system and what plants you use. And it's a little more complex and involved, but you can get the basic soil test, which tests chemistry, but there's another test called the Haney test. And I did the Haney test on my property, and it disproves some of what the soil sample proved, where it did measure a few other factors. One is CO2 output. CO2 output is microbial activity in the soil, how much the soil is working, and that's kind of engages the health of the soil. Put that aside, if you're looking at the chemical test of it, one thing I would tell everybody, you can use these apps to optimize the amount of fertilizer you have down, get your pH right, and then start screwing with fertilizer. It takes 8 to 15 months to get, if you're doing bulk ag lime, you're buying, you can buy pelletized lime in a bag for $3 or $4. You can buy pulverized lime in a bag, and then you can buy ag lime. And there's a few different variations of ag lime, but most of it's calcium-based ag lime. And that ag lime you can put on the back of a trailer, whatever, put anywhere between upwards of 3 to 4 tons in a year. And I can shovel it out. You could get drop spreaders. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do it, but improving the soil is number one. Synthetics is number two. So when they do synthetic recommendations, you can optimize. They can build you. If you buy 500 pounds of fertilizer, let's hope you're not doing that. But if you have to buy some fertilizer, you can use these apps where they have your 19-19-19 or 24-00 or whatever the NPK requirements. And if nobody knows what NPK is, nitrogen is number one, and phosphorus is P, and K is potassium. And those are the three primary elements, but there's all these other micronutrients that you need to focus on. And they can build you up a concoction for your particular property. But I would recommend people reduce their output. We had an issue in Skaneateles Lake last year where, this watershed off Skaneateles Lake was pumping all this nitrogen and phosphorus into the lakes, and they had this algae bloom. It just goes to show you that putting too much synthetics on your ground, they don't absorb it. So do it in stages, do it in chunks, do 60% of what they recommend. That would be a starting point. If you want to increase it, great, but let's start there. So I'm rambling, but think about your environment and think about what you're putting in the soil, because high synthetics may not be a good thing for the environment,
yeah,
particularly phosphorus.
An analogy there with the runoff is that, if you go and take a whole bunch of vitamins because you want to make sure you're fending off any viruses or illnesses, you're just going to piss out everything that your body can't absorb. And that's no different than what you're talking about with putting out fertilizers and everything else. You can
Yeah, we're
only,
not trying to build, we're not trying to do 150 bushel of corn a year. What we're trying to do is grow food for deer.
right.
And by the way, it's a net loss anyhow. Yeah, you get some return. Maybe you're helping the deer a little bit, but you're kind of losing money on the deal.
It's like Pertnear Outdoors. We're a non-for-profit organization. Yeah.
It's a net loss.
Yeah, it's a net loss. That's going to be our new thing. Hashtag net loss.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, but the limestone takes time. Think about that, and think about what you're planning and why. I went through an aha moment 3 years ago with what I was planning. I said to myself, first off, I don't have the time to till the soil. I have a rototiller for my tractor. I have the equipment to do all this stuff. In fact, I rototilled the ground today and I felt sick about it. I'm putting in screen on my property, and I'm telling you, I have no choice but to rototill the ground. It just makes me sick. I'm waiting for my switchgrass to come up, my willow screening, my spruce trees. I mean, it takes 3 years to get somewhere I have some semblance of a screen. So I have to put a temporary screen in place. Guys use Egyptian weed. I'm using a sorghum Sudan hybrid that's kind of newer for this type of stuff. So I'm playing with some stuff right now, but tilling the dirt makes me sick. It destroys soil aggregates. It destroys the composition. It introduces oxygen into the soil. It doesn't need any more oxygen, and it releases carbon. There's more carbon in the soil than anywhere. It's not even in close in the capacity in the atmosphere as in the dirt. And we should be saving the carbon. That's the backbone of your soil health. So before you till the soil, think about some of these other methods we talked about early on. You're saving the planet. It sounds silly, but you are. You're helping, to reduce, carbon loss. And that's a big thing that plagues the Midwest. And by the way, our soil aren't as great as theirs, so let's be smart.
Yeah, and that's something that Dallas and I, when we were talking a couple of days ago, when John, you and I were talking, then I talked to Dallas, and Dallas got talking about the impacts of what you just covered as from tilling and turning the ground up. And I was talking to my brother today, and that's one of the big issues we're having at our camp is that we've gotten into the routine over the last probably 10 years now. Every year we're tilling the ground up, sometimes like multiple times a year, or just and we're having a ton of issues with weeds, and the weeds are just overtaking whatever we're planting. And ironically, we've got stuff coming up in the ground that we don't know what the hell it is. It's not what we planted, but the deer are hammering it. We have no idea what it is, but the deer are loving it. So, it's interesting hearing this stuff, and I've heard it 100 times on podcasts, but a lot of times it's, this is what Dallas and I talked about, is that it's very hard to relate to it when it's a hypothetical or it's not your local area, and you're just trying to like draw that picture. So for me, like talking to Dallas about it, talking to you about it, like it's helping me kind of understand it in our situation, not in trying to understand what somebody else is working through. And, we're not, what we've got at our camp, it's just 2, 3, 4 food plots that we've built over the years by cutting timber out. My dad and his brother, harvesting the timber and then digging up all the stumps and making food plots in the middle of the hardwoods, which is a fairly common thing when you get, our area in Naples and over through the Finger Lakes. Like there's a lot of that where guys are building food plots in the timber. But, like what we're doing at the farm, we have tons and tons of food around. There's corn and beans more than the deer could possibly ever eat. But, we're trying to have those little tiny little food plots like the couple that Dallas and I put in 2 years ago that are just to slow them down, just to give them a spot to go to before they go to that primary food source. And
so Dallas, you were saying that on your, a few years ago, you were leaving up corn and beans. I'm guessing they were grain beans all season, pretty much for the deer. Yeah, that's hard to compete with. I mean, soybean is, by far, probably the most attractive. It's got the highest crude protein. It's highly digestible by deer. Bucks and does socialize in it all summer. That says something because they don't like to be socially, next to one another, as much as they
That's a
are
good
in those
point.
fields. And corn's great because, not only is corn a big carb to the deer, it's above the snow. It's easily accessible. I mean, it provides excellent cover. I mean, you can't really compete with those two, but what those two things are doing from the soil and a monoculture standpoint is, I don't want to say they're raping it, but they're not those plants as either a cash crop or a crop for cattle or whatever. What, it's a yield focus, right? If you're going to get over it in this business of focusing on soil and soil health, tilling the soil, destroying the organic material, releasing all the things we talked about, that messes up the fertility and your organic matter as it goes down. You take a soil sample every year, your organic matter will go down every single year that you till. That is the backbone of everything that you're trying to create. Instituting plants into this equation, focusing on biology above and below the soil, that's the game changer. Multi-species plantings is a game changer. All my clients at this point, I'm recommending multi-species blends, and they're diverse blends. I mean, one blend is 15 different seeds, and it's a broadleaf, it's a grass, it's a legume, it's a brassica. So there's a lot of variety in those plantings. They are not deer in a bag plantings. They're designed plantings for their property and based on their soil conditions. So it gets more involved, but if you want to get away from tillage, the simple example I gave is one. The other thing is you can't be scared to spray, at least initially. And so people are scared of glyphosate and atrazine and all these other pesticides that are out there. You're going to have to be okay with initially spraying because you're going to have to set back the soil to zero. And then you're going to have to get into thinking about, okay, now what do I do? Okay. So that's an important topic to think about is, are you okay with spraying? Are you okay? One thing I would recommend is ammonium sulfate. People put ammonium sulfate when they're spraying Roundup. It opens the plant, makes it more susceptible to the Roundup. Don't do that. That makes your soil way more acidic than it has to be. Crop oil, surfactants are tied to your Roundup. They're already in there. Use that as a means to connect to the plant, and it destroys and limits essentially the vascular system. It cuts the roots off from the plant, essentially what it does. So, use that as the means to kind of get to your next phase. And by the way, you can initially till the soil and till those nutrients in, and then start into this no-till system. So that's an option for you. And by the way, I don't have a no-till drill. Okay, I don't even need a roller crimper. I made one. Okay, and you can make one for nothing. And you don't need a tractor. If you have an ATV, is great. If you have a garden tractor, that helps as well. So you can get into this kind of a no-till system without these, growing deer TV, Genesis, whatever type of drills they're using. You don't need any of that stuff. I don't have them on my property, and I'm highly successful.
Well, the thing is too, like, we had a no-till drill, but we couldn't even get into some of the spots too. So like, we had all this big equipment, and some of the spots that we wanted to put food plots, you couldn't either. It was, the ground was super wet, and that's why there weren't fields there to begin with, or it was just that it was just a narrow spot in the trees. Like me and Billy carved out a spot in the woods. You can't get a 6-row corn planter and a 200 horsepower Massey Ferguson back in there to plant that stuff.
Yeah.
So even when you have the equipment, you have to have these tools at your disposal. But that's a good point you made too about it's not that you can't till initially, because that's one of the options that we're considering right now is kill everything, come in and till it, and get a good plant in and get a good plant base going, and then try to convert into more of the no-till next year.
Yeah.
And And the glyphosate thing is another thing too. There's everybody I talk to that's not associated with farming is scared to death of glyphosate. They think they're going to get cancer by spreading it on their food plots. But I mean, I would recommend drinking it. But I mean, these farmers have been using it for 100 years out here. They spray 3 times a year, all their fields, and yeah, they're up in a cab tractor doing it, but it's a necessary evil if you want to look at it that way, because you've got to kill those weeds to be able to do anything useful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think synthetics are a lot more harmful than Roundup, to be honest with you. I think it's an unnatural thing. And I think most people that are focusing on whitetail deer, the reason they're focusing on deer is to eat organic meat. And, that's not to say that these deer aren't wandering off, eating a cornfield that's filled with atrazine and, there's a water source issue. But, why proliferate that topic if you don't have to?
Yeah.
So I guess you're right. The lesser of the two evils, tilling the ground, and then, okay, now you're making a selection of, okay, what is, in this case, you're going to plant in the summertime. What do I want to plant in the summertime? I'll give you my textbook answer. Plant something that will grow, and plant something that will help build the soil's nutrient recycling. Because when you go into fall, that's when you want the most palatable plants. You're hunting the deer in that time period. What I recommend is I look at real simple. You could have these really immense multi-species blends, and I made one for this podcast. But typically I have 2. So out of the 4 areas that we talked about, brassica, broadleaf, legume, and I'm losing my mind right here.
A cereal rye.
Yeah, grass. Sorry. You want to have 2 each one of those species in that mix. Brassicas are kind of tough because there isn't really a brassica that does well in drought and heat. There is one though. There's a collard. You can buy collards. Those work really well in the summertime. They have a deep tap root and they're a non-bulb plant. So that's one option. So kind of the one I came up with for our summer planning, and this is what I'd recommend. So for your scenario, buckwheat, which is a broadleaf, okay, cowpeas, which everyone knows cowpeas are highly palatable. It's a legume. Sunflower, deer eat the hell out of sunflowers. Soybean, a forage soybean, okay, not a grain soybean, a forage soybean. Lots of leaves, okay. Oats, I love spring oats. They grow really easily. And that planting is going to take you between 60 and 80 days before, not full maturity, but that's when you're going to want to crimp it. We talked about grasses. Again, the pollen stage, that's when you want to look to crimp it. And out of that mix, you want to have more buckwheat and oats than the other ones, because that's what you're using to crimp. That's the stemmy stuff that's going to create your weed mat. So when you push it over, roll it, mow it, crimp it, that gives you your weed mat. And then before you plant that, before you roll or crimp that, you're going to put down your fall plot. And you're going to think about your maturity rates between those 2. So you may end up, crimping, rolling, mowing early because, these have a 60 or 80 day maturity, and I want the plants to get to point X before the deer find them palatable. I mean, you realistically need, about 60 days to get your brassicas up to snuff. So walk that back. You got a 140-day growing season. You're already into June. Okay, add 60 and then add 60 more. Holy shit, we're into November. So you got to kind of time things appropriately and look at the maturity rates of different plants. So I'll give you a fall blend. So this would be your fall blend option. Red clover, I love red clover. Urson clover, that would be an alternative to that one. That will die, that's an annual. And a lot of these are annuals. Actually, all the ones I just read off before were annuals. And this no-till system, you're going to deal with annuals, not perennials. You don't have these lush clover plots, okay? Almost wheat, we talked about wheat earlier. That's a grass. Hybrid brassica. You could do ball brassica, you could do any type of brassica, but some type of brassica in there, okay? And brassicas last year all the way into February. We had them this year in the backyard. They were eating probably in March, and that's unheard of. I mean, just the type of weather conditions they were in. Crimson clover, love that. That's a biannual that will actually grow in the springtime. That's a clover that will eventually phase itself out of the equation, but it's okay. Nitrogen producer, and then triticale. I like triticale. It grows well. It's a great plant to crimp. You already have your wheat in there. Again, you have two grasses in there that you're going to crimp sometime in the springtime, and usually around the May or June time, depending on what your next planting is. You could plant the exact same thing I said, for the springtime earlier in the next springtime. You can keep in those 2 cycles of plants. Now, obviously, the rates and stuff like that varies in soil conditions and all that stuff. I don't want to give exact, quotes on what you should plant there, but you're going to plant a lot heavier in those grasses, those hard carbs for, again, covering the soil. That's a huge part of this equation. If you do not cover your soil, you're depleting your soil and you're creating opportunity for erosion. That's the most important thing. It armors the soil. It eliminates that winter wear that comes when you just have an annual crop. Okay, so planting those grasses are really important. I'm trying to think what else you need to know about. But yeah, those are, the one thing I would say this is, if you get into the system and you start planning kind of a no-till type scenario and you start to see plants grow up, if you're scared to plant or spray glyphosate, you're going to have to pull weeds. You're going to have to hand pull weeds. If you have the time to do it, best of luck. But you could also continue to do soil test and see what you need to do, because you could add fertilizer. I'm not saying don't add fertilizer. You can certainly do that. But take soil samples, and guess what you'll see? You'll see your organic matter doesn't change. You'll actually see, based even on the plants that I gave you, your pH will naturally kind of maintain itself. When you start adding a lot of synthetics in there or sulfates, that'll degrade. It depends on the type of soil you have. If you have clay soil, it does degrade over time. If you have clay soil, a lot of people do, focus on broadleaf and deep taproot plants. That's the best way to aerate and aggregate your soil. You want to have soil that looks like black cake. When you're eating your chocolate cake and it's kind of got that crummy look to it, it's kind of porous. If you can replicate that on your land, and I've seen people with clay soil have components of that, but they have a lot of humic matter, that shows really healthy soil in those conditions. You got to put a lot of lime on clay soil. But once you get it there, man, you're no different from everybody else. You just kind of got to maintain it. So long-winded, but a lot of answers to probably some of the questions I'm hoping you had.
Yeah, that's for us. We have a lot of clay soil, and a lot of these areas we're going to be planting in are very wet too. Like even right now, is with all the hot, dry weather we've had the last couple of weeks, the ground is still mushy in a lot of the areas that we're going to want to plant. So that makes it challenging to plant twice. So
I'll tell you this, and I didn't believe this till a couple of years ago. So my no-till system, I've got wet areas, and I'm guessing you have reed canary in those areas, is my guess.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So in those particular areas, I can give you a long one, but I won't get into that today. I can give you some recommendations after this. But one thing I would say is, when you increase your organic matter and you focus on some of the plants we talked about today, and there's another recommendation of plants to plant in those conditions, you'll see way better water infiltration. If you have vernal pools or like standing water that's just there, that's resident, you're not going to fix that, but you may fix some of the other issues that are a factor in that, and you'll aerate the soil more. And again, in the summertime, I would recommend planting something that really enjoys a lot of standing water. Asa clover is one thing that pops up in my mind. Sometimes deep tap roots help kind of absorb some of that. So it seems odd to say that chicory actually does okay in those conditions, which I wouldn't think it would. But yeah, bursting clover does okay. Some of the clovers do okay. Yeah, it's tough when you start to deal with wet soil, and if you're using reed canary grass in there, it's tough to get away with. Do not till the soil with reed canary grass. You're asking for problems.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of that stuff, and that's part of the reason we've been trying to plant trees. And we found out the first couple of years that you can't even plant spruce trees in reed canary grass unless you go in and spray it at least 1 to 2 times a year, because they just will drown. They suffocate everything. That's what, when you walk through a canary grass field, there's nothing growing in there other than canary grass. So I'm trying to do everything
All
I
right.
can to get rid of as much of that as I can.
Yeah, yeah. Off topic, but to maybe start thinking about your issue and solving that problem is exterior to this food plot to try to drain some of the, plants to plant river birch. That does well. It is going to soak up, those root systems soak up a ton of water. Willows, willow blend I would recommend is Fish Creek, Wilcock, Allegheny. Those are some of the blends I would consider using. And those will grow like hell. You got to probably, I don't know your area, so I don't want to recommend what to spray, but there's some options for you to spray, some aquatic sprays that do pretty well. I'm not sure if you're a wetland area. If you are, then there's some limitations on you. But, if you start putting in plants and take care of that reed canary grass, mowing proliferates it as well.
Yes.
So you're really dealing with spraying. I've never burned it. You can't burn in this state, but I'd be interested to see what that ends up doing.
I would love to burn it. I've talked to some firefighters around here a little bit about it, and I've got some mixed answers on what we could really do. But I think some of this is getting a little bit late now. There's a lot of other stuff growing up in there that I might not want to burn. But yeah, that would be, I'm afraid to do it myself. And as you said, I really can't. But man, I would love to see what would happen with some of this stuff if we could just burn it.
Yeah. That saves a lot of time. And yeah, it's a quick, I'd have to look back, but I'm pretty sure when I did research on the reed canary, that may not be a good way to handle it. But some of the aquatic sprays absolutely work. I mean, I've used them, so I know that they work. And I can give you some recommendations off.
I like the idea too of also just putting in some, we've tried a lot of the hardwood trees and things like that, and you still mix that in, but why not just put some willow and stuff that likes it's not like it's, we're always looking for like hard mass trees or soft mass trees that'll provide extra food, but let's face it, there's enough food around. Really, we just need cover and stuff like that that'll provide, because the willows, they'll dry up a lot of the water too with those deep taproot systems. So I've been considering this for a little while of trying to add in some more of that kind of stuff because they grow fast too. So it becomes cover quicker than like say an oak tree would.
Right.
So,
and this no-till system that we're talking about absolutely works for those areas, assuming they don't continue to get flooded. So I would say that, the species of the variety of plants are going to change a little bit based on your scenario there, but you can still do a no-till system that would work. If I was dealing with wetland areas or wetter areas, not specifically wetlands, I would focus on perennial plots. I wouldn't focus as much on annual plots, just because there's a lot of maintenance that goes on in there. And like you said, dealing with some of those wet areas, that's a recommendation. You could do an annual, keep doing the system that we're talking about, and it would absolutely work. I mean, again, the biggest thing is not disturbing the soil enough where you're going to disrupt these plants. I mean, Billy, you didn't know it was growing, but I'm guessing it was forbs and deer were hammering it. You don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Okay, with some of these systems where you're planting 10, 15, 20 species, what you're doing is you're putting so many seed in the ground at certain time, and it's all different seed. I mean, okra, flax. I mean, stuff on okra, that's a southern, nobody plants okra around here. Well, it's a great stemmy plant for the summertime. Sun hemp. Don't plant sun hemp in large quantities in the no-till system. But guess what? They eat the hell out of sun hemp. But it doesn't work because it's too stemmy for the roller crimping system. But think about these varieties. And what will end up happening is you'll overwhelm the seed bank with all this residual seed. Some will germinate, some won't, some will survive to the next year. Nature will take its course, but you got these jungle plots. And these jungle plots include a lot of pollinators because of the broadleafs, a lot of grasses, as we talked about. And those grasses are going to carry over from year to year. and obviously the legume mix. One of the things I'm going to tell everyone, and this really, really irks me, is every deer in the bag that I've looked at, there's usually a high legume content. And legumes are awesome. They're a high attraction for deer. I recommend the legumes in this discussion. But legumes in high quality put too much nitrogen in the ground. You have a nitrogen surplus. And what that ends up doing in these clover plots, as an example, you need something to consume that nitrogen. And typically it's grass. And we have all sorts of nice grasses around here that love to take over these food plots.
Yeah.
And people are out there spraying, clethodim, whatever they're spraying to kill the grass. What ends up happening is you're fighting a fire. And it's your fault because monocultures of crops don't deal with nutrient exchange. They deal with nutrient overload, and that overload has to result in something. So if you're going to plant clover, please plant it with something that consumes clover, that would take up that nitrogen and use it and consume it. Some grasses are good examples. There's broadleaves that use nitrogen, but something that's going to consume that. Because if you don't do that, you're going to have these nitrogen credits in the ground that's going to do you nothing but trouble. So you got to think about what plants need. And I don't want to get into soil science class here with everybody, but when you do these multi-species blend, they're supposed to complement each other. I mean, the old adage, you probably heard of the three sisters, I think it's corn, bean, squash, right? They complement each other, right? The Native Americans figured out in the 1300s that, oh my God, if I plant these plants, they work together. Think about that in your plantings. Don't think about synthetics. Think about those things. And you'll be a lot happier with it too. Again, I haven't used synthetics on any of my food plots. Okay, 0 synthetics in 5 years. Okay, that's a staple. And by the way, I'm planting sunflowers and soybeans and mung beans. Mung beans are phenomenal. Mung beans will beat the shit out of cowpeas. They are way more attractive than cowpeas. In fact, I would say they're probably as attractive as soybean, maybe more attractive. So, eat your heart out there. I mean, there's another option for you that kicks the shit out of a very popular type plant. So, there's a lot of options out there. Start doing your research, start thinking differently about this, and start, start planning ahead, because you can do a lot with your conditions and really change your entire property.
So
I want to just say one more thing, and I know I'm talking a lot. Today, I kicked up 2 fawns on my property. Went over, then I tilled the dirt. I'm really upset about it, right? Kicked up 2 fawns on my property. Last year, I didn't have one single fawn on my property. So, that's a factor of a lot of things. But honestly, I think the food plot attraction component of it is huge. And by the way, food plot keeps them the hell out of my hardwoods that I'm trying to regenerate right now with young saplings and growth and forbs. And it gives those things a chance to live another year. So, it takes some pressure off your woods. People say that it's a supplemental. It is supplemental, but man, when it's the focus point, it may save some of the other goals that I have, generating more cover, generating more saplings, right? We're focused on other types of food, not just supplemental food like food plots. So, all right, I'll shut up.
No, you're good. You've been talking a lot about synthetics, and just give a general definition of synthetics in the term that you're using them, or that you're talking about. And it's stuff that's, what are the synthetics you're talking about? I guess that's just
so. When we talked about earlier, we talked about NPK. So when you get a soil test, it's going to give you recommendations of what to plant in your soil: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It's going to give you a general recommendation of how much you should put on per acre. And those synthetics you're going to apply that in the soil. You're typically going to till that into the soil. And you can broadcast it. Nitrogen is probably not the best to broadcast, but if you time it right with the rain, that'll work. It volatilizes. Oh, by the way, when you're taking a soil sample, it doesn't measure nitrogen in usable form because it's so volatile, it changes every day. So those synthetics that you're applying in your soil become really the heartbeat of kind of the plant life. What we're recommending is get away from that. You have free nitrogen in the air, okay? Legumes are the one thing that takes that air molecule and puts it into the dirt. And it puts it in the dirt and it feeds other plants as a result of that. Same thing with carbon. Same thing with hydrogen, same thing with oxygen. So those are all free in the air for these plants to take in and put in the soil. And that's an organic form. And when it's in the soil, it can be used and it can be reapplied. And if you plant the right plants, it'll exchange all those nutrients. And you don't have to put a drop of synthetics in your plants.
Cool. Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks for
Cool.
explaining that, because I didn't get that. So hopefully that helps some
That
other
should
people
be
too.
And that should be everybody's goal. Less, because all the things you're talking about is less work as far as like tilling the soil and things like that. And fertilizer, it's money. It's money that you're spreading on the ground. That there's ways to avoid having to do that kind of thing.
Right. The only reason I started doing it was save money. Really, that was the first reason. It was a selfish reason. But frankly, you know, like I said, this is a net loss. Money's falling out of my pocket when I'm doing this stuff. But I will say this, when you're doing the broadcast thing, because we don't have no-till drills, or most people don't, your rates are going to be higher. Your seeding rate's going to be 50% higher as compared to no-till. And in doing so, you're going to spend more money on seed. So, you know, there may be some there may be some weighting in those offsets, but the reality of it is, you know, I'd rather put money into seed and not dump money in synthetics. I mean, if I had the choice, I'm going to put money into seed. And by the way, I'm experimenting too, and I'm having fun doing it because stuff is popping up. Sometimes I don't know what the hell it is until, holy shit, that worked. You know, that came up. Oh my God, the deer eating it. Deer eat okra? What? You know, sun hemp? I mean, you know, I mean, it's cool seeing some of these new things and playing with some of the concoctions. I mean, I enjoy it, and I think people should look at it a little bit differently. And you know, I think if if there's one thing out of this that anybody takes is everybody can do things different ways. If you're doing it to save time and money, the no-till system is the way to go. You may struggle with other factors. It may take you a while to fight off weeds. It may take you a while to fight off, plants that are interfering. Deal with your invasives. I mean, you know, you start to read the soil. You can start to read the soil and Google this, reading weeds. When you look at a weed, what does it tell you about the soil? You know, what does a dandelion tell you versus what a thistle plant tells you? Now that may not be exactly right because that's, you know, that plant came in from somewhere else or that seed came in from somewhere else. But if it's native, look at what it's telling you about the soil. And that may indicate that you need to add more micronutrients or macronutrients. And so you may not need a soil test every year or two, but maybe the third year you get a soil test and you look at these factors. So start understanding what's on your landscape before you start tilling the dirt. So that would be my big message, is think deeper about the plants that are on your property. And by the way, you know, there's been some anecdotal evidence about deer being more attracted to these no-till because of, you know, it's more natural. I don't have any data on that. I just know the deer eat the shit out of my food plots. Happy, you know, it's as simple as that. And by the way, it took me half the time that everyone else did, because today when I was tilling the ground, it sucked. I was too lazy to go back to get my cultivator. What did I do? I just ran it over the tires. I said, this is how I'm going to cultivate, you know, my food plot today, because I don't have time to go back because I got a meeting coming up that I got to go to. So, you know, it's those things that are just, I wouldn't have to do that normally, but you know, I'm putting in screens. So, you know, there's that's what I'm dealing with.
I guess go ahead, Dallas.
Well, I just wanted to, he mentioned screens, and why he was tilling for that. And I think I know the answer is that you need to plant that screen, the switchgrass or whatever you're planting. You want to get one good planting of that and have it grow and be successful in one shot. Is that why you're tilling those areas, John?
Well, I'm planting in temporary screen. So a lot of people plant Egyptian wheat. So that's what I was talking about for putting in long-term screens, you know, 20-year screens like the switchgrass, and different varieties. There's a couple techniques to that. But typically a lot of guys frost seed those, and then they might spray, you know, kind of before green up time with a pre-emergent, and then sometimes with a post-emergent, you know, pre-post herbicide. You know, I'm just trying to put up a screen now so I can hunt these areas because they're big, you know, big fields. But I take the fields and I chop them down into little sections. And I really, you know, I'd rather hunt, you know, instead of a big 5-acre field, I'd rather hunt, 5 little fields within that just to segregate the deer and give them more options. The other thing I will recommend for everybody is if you're getting into planting food plots, and a good thing I do I'm a data guy. So I'm always looking at data, how many deer, I'm trying to do calculations. I'm looking at bite counts. Put up cages in your food plot. Look at utilization. Are they utilizing this or not? Yes, you can have cameras, but physically look at the difference. Put these cages up and see how tall has my, whatever plant, clover plant grown over this period of time. Holy shit, the deer are using the hell of plants. It won't just make you feel good. You get some data out of that. Is your utilization high, low, those type of things. And actually you can start to do tonnage, dry matter tonnage based upon, the level of use. You can see how often the deer use it based on taking camera pictures and looking at data. And then you start to look at your deer population. And now's the time I'm making decisions. I know my deer don't go all over the place. These are core areas, and I make them core areas because how I design them. Deer may fluctuate in, but man, I keep a good resident deer herd. I don't lose deer to fall ranges. My deer don't really fall off. I'm usually picking up deer. So I'm picking up deer all season now and until hunting time. I'm almost replenishing the coffers. I'm getting, tons of benefit out of the systems that I'm putting in place. So one of those are the food plots. But I'm hunting them differently than some people. I'm sporadically hunting. I'm not putting a lot of time into hunting the deer, and I'm using a lot of tools to remotely monitor the deer. But yeah, screening I think is critical. I think people should be screening everything. I found more success in screening either natural or, like I said, I'm planting stuff. And Egyptian wheat works really well. I'm using a new type of sorghum. If it works well, I'll let you guys know. I'm goofing around with some smaller stem stuff and see how that goes better than the bigger stem stuff. So
nice.
We'll see what ends up happening.
Now you were talking about the little that four-part blend you talked about earlier. Are you going to a local grain mill and having them mix that for you, or how are you getting your seed taken care of for that?
So the big seed, I go to a farmer. I got a seed distributor here, and that's where you start to make connections. Stratton Seed Company is a company I would use. Land of Legacy recommends them. They have a good multi-blend species. Green Cover Seed, Green Seed Cover. That company has some blends. I'm trying to think. Those are pretty much the two big companies. Ernst Seed has some seed that you can buy. Hancock Seed. Those are good places to go. You can order it all online. So buy your big seed that saves you shipping. That's why I buy that from maybe your local mills, your ag stores, and then if you need smaller seed, smaller quantities of seed, look towards these other different entities. This is a game changer. There's only a few consultants in the country that are recommending this type of stuff. So, I'm happy that, we could talk about it in New York because I think it is different. There's only really another consultant that I know that's doing this professionally, that's recommending these. And he's got pretty big name clients. So, and we started doing this about the same time, about 3 years ago. So, my blends, what I'm doing, there's totally simpler options than that, but, what I'm doing seems to be working. So, not saying it's the only option. There's way simpler options. One more thing. On my property this year, when I was designing food plots and everything like that, I was looking at the soil. I was trying to think what to do. I was getting all worried. We were dozing off. I wanted to save as much soils as we could. I have not touched those soils because I was so worried the depth of them was so shallow. And it really wasn't. I was even scared to put a shovel in the ground. That's how anal I was about worrying about disturbing my soils. I did a really simple buckwheat, oats, and peas in every single plot. Then I put in, now I'm building the soil. So I'm actually doing clover, funny. I'm doing clover and chicory in parts of those, and then I'm doing the multi-species blend. But I have not touched that soil at all. And I haven't had any synthetic, like I said earlier. And man, if you could have seen my food plots in February, it was like gray, neon green. Neon green. And I've got pictures of it. And it was like, holy shit, you could see those food plots from space. And it was really, really cool. And it shows that you could take woods to food plots in no time at all. Again, I have got pretty good soil, so I'm a little lucky. But again, I didn't till the soil, and I didn't lose anything as a result of that. And those are really simple blend getting into my fall blend. And I like simple chicory, clover. I like those, but for some of my goals that I'm into now, and not wanting to manage high levels of nitrogen, continuously with spraying, I'm not getting into that business. I'm going to be smart about what I plant.
I've learned a shitload here tonight. Dallas, is there anything that you that you wanted to know or wanted to get from this conversation we haven't touched on yet?
I think what I've got from this conversation is this, it's the same as a lot of things you listen to, is that there's a lot of good information there, and John's got so much knowledge in this type of thing. It's good to be able to just sit down and talk to someone that knows this subject matter very well. So obviously you've got our attention already. And so, but can anyone listening here whose head's spinning a little bit right now contact you for the same sort of advice that you're giving us?
Yeah. Yep. And I don't mind talking to anybody about these topics. It's important to me. So yeah, you can get a hold of me. Go to the website, Whitetail Landscapes, and my phone number's on there. You can email me. You can get me on Instagram or Facebook as well. I'm open to talk to anybody about this stuff, and I can give you, some recommendations that might help you get you to getting down this path. But conventional tilling methods, that's fine. And people that want to stay down that road, there's nothing wrong with that. Using synthetics, that's a personal decision. Using all these other herbicides we talked about, that's a personal decision. I'm just trying to go a slightly different way in it, and I'm finding some success in it. But yeah, get a hold of me, and I'd be willing to help you. I'll even look at your soil samples. If you're having some questions on that, what to plant, I can show you, some of the things that I do when I look at soils and what I consider. And you learn a lot from a soil sample test. And there's other soil sample tests as I recommended, and maybe you want to get one of those as well. So yeah, that's it. Get a hold of me.
Thanks.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate it. And I love, you and I talked quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, John, and it's fun to have a group of people that are talking about New York based stuff, and it's all relatable. And that's what we're trying to do here, is trying to have a local flavor to this, because there's a lot of really good stuff going on in New York. There's a lot of really good things we can all be doing to continue to see our hunting success, just like people are talking about and seeing in other areas. And I appreciate you kind of jumping on board with us here and doing these conversations, because you're putting a lot of info out there for people to digest and to think about. And we appreciate what you're doing. So thanks, and keep up the good work on that.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
No problem. Have a good night, and we'll catch up with you maybe later in maybe July, mid-July, and kind of talk about what people should be doing to get those fall plots in, just to kind of keep that conversation rolling.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Great.
All right, buddy. Thanks. We'll report back on how our roller crimping's going. I'm all educated now. I got a bunch of shit 2x4s out back. I'm gonna go start building now.
Perfect.
All right.
Cool.
See ya. Thanks, guys.